I would like to tell you about my friend Judy, the Reverend Judy Wells. You see her picture up here on the screen. Judy is her real name, and I have permission from her husband, Dwayne, to share her story with you. Judy was a colleague of mine down in Pennsylvania. When I first met her, she and Dwayne were co-ministers of the UU Church of the Cumberland Valley in Carlisle. I met Judy in the first months of my own ministry, and she quickly became a mentor, a confidant, and a friend. Judy was deeply committed to this experiment that we call Unitarian Universalism, and she was a fierce advocate for all that we claim to stand for: justice, compassion, integrity, curiosity, love. Love in all its forms, celebrated by all her people. Love is a powerful force for good in the world. About her ministry, she once wrote, and I quote, "I cannot think of a greater privilege than making it my life's work to help people align themselves for the good of the universe." Judy was a lover of life. She loved her husband, Dwayne. She loved her kids and her grandkids. She loved her dogs. She loved her friends and her colleagues, so I was the beneficiary of that love. I was within the orbit of her fierce love. Like me, Judy also loved the occasional nip of a good bourbon. Judy was also a knitter par excellence. One of my wife's favorite memories of Judy was when they spent the morning during General Assembly in Spokane, Washington. They skipped out on General Assembly and spent the morning poring over skeins of yarn in a local yarn shop. I am actually wearing a pair of socks that Judy knit for me today. I treasure this gift that she gave me. Judy and Dwayne retired from active congregational ministry in 2011 and shortly thereafter moved to the West Coast to be closer to some of their children and grandchildren. Neither her ministry nor our friendship ended then. Judy continued to serve our denomination, our Ministers Association, and her newly adopted home church, First Unitarian in Portland, Oregon. We stayed in touch across the miles, and whenever they were on the East Coast, Dwayne and Judy would visit us. In 2017, when Judy received her cancer diagnosis, it was a rare form of abdominal cancer. It set her back on her heels, but not for long. Judy reaffirmed her commitment to live life to its fullest for as long as she could. She stayed active in her church. She and Dwayne traveled. She served as president of the UU Retired Ministers and Partners Association. The two of them spent time with their children and grandchildren on the Oregon coast. And Judy kept on knitting. For 3 years, Judy underwent a series of chemo and radiation treatments, which slowed the progress of her disease, but it didn't stop it. The only thing that slowed Judy down was COVID, when it hit in the spring of 2020. She and Dwayne had to hunker down in their home for fear of the virus in Judy's compromised condition. In late June of the first year of the pandemic, Judy began experiencing severe abdominal pain and was admitted to the hospital. Exploratory surgery revealed the extent of the cancer, and Judy was told that there was nothing left that the doctors could do. Soon thereafter, she began receiving nutrition via a feeding tube, administered daily by Dwayne with the support of a visiting nurse. Throughout the summer of 2020, Judy and Dwayne entertained family and friends as best they could during the pandemic, visiting masked, outdoors, and socially distanced. There were tender times to reminisce and to say goodbye. During this time, Judy kept knitting, completing several projects that were important to her. She also stayed engaged in politics, taking on a personal letter-writing campaign to encourage people to vote, hoping to ensure that Joe Biden would defeat the then current president. I'm here this morning both as a Unitarian Universalist pastor and as a member of the board of the New Hampshire Alliance for End-of-Life Options, as Michael introduced me. The Alliance works to educate and to advocate, to inform people about what choices are available to them as they near the end of their lives, and to advocate for the passage of a so-called death with dignity law here in New Hampshire. As you may know, both Maine and Vermont, as well as 8 other states and the District of Columbia, have passed laws that allow people diagnosed with a terminal illness to use medical aid in dying. And that is the term of art, medical aid in dying. And more than a dozen other states are considering such a law. Vermont, if you may have heard, has recently removed the residency requirement from its law, making medical aid in dying available to out-of-staters. But this does not obviate the need for such a law here in the Granite State. As a matter of accessibility and a matter of compassion, forcing people to travel, even to a neighboring state, to end their lives means that it is only available to those who can afford to travel. And forcing them to end their lives, if they so choose, far from home in some sterile inn or hotel instead of at home is, I think, simply cruel. The Alliance hopes to make medical aid in dying, or MAID, available to all of us here, and has proposed a bill that we hope will be considered in the upcoming session of the legislature. It may seem like a no-brainer that we as Unitarian Universalists should support legislation that allows us the freedom to end our lives on our own terms. But I think it's important to articulate how our UU values and principles align with the adoption of a MAID law here in New Hampshire. While we're all probably familiar with the traditional 7 principles that have historically guided us, I'd like to speak to this topic in the language of the proposed changes to Article 2 of the UUA bylaws, which are currently under consideration. These principles are identified as interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity. I hope you're familiar with this diagram, which you can see on the screen. Let's start with equity. The principle of equity affirms that each of us should have control over our own beings and our own bodies. We hold as elemental to our faith the power of our own agency and our ability, consistent with our principles, to make moral choices for ourselves. The proposed legislation we are advocating does not compel anyone to take advantage of its measures. We are seeking simply to offer every Granite Stater the option, at their own choosing, to avail themselves of MAID. Now, let me be clear that this bill would not authorize euthanasia at any time by anyone. Euthanasia is often brought up as a reason not to pass a MAID law by those who oppose it. The bill simply assures, affirms, and supports the moral agency of the person with the terminal condition. No one else can make this decision for them or take action on their behalf. The language of the bill also supports our commitment to pluralism. It recognizes that everyone is different and everyone approaches this issue from their own perspective and experience. It doesn't force medical aid in dying on anyone. It simply makes it an option that a person with a terminal condition might choose. Now, while our principles declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness, they also assert our interdependence, recognizing that we are all woven into the web of all of life. As interdependent beings, we also recognize that suffering is a universal condition. All beings, to differing degrees and at different times, experience suffering. Our interdependence reminds us that we do not suffer in isolation, and that the suffering of one contributes to the suffering of all. We therefore have a religious and moral duty to reduce suffering where and when we can. To offer the option to choose medical aid in dying has been shown to be a source of great comfort to those suffering from a terminal condition, whether or not they actually avail themselves of the option. Let me emphasize that. Just having the option available, whether or not it's used, is a source of comfort to those who are dying. While hospice and palliative care have progressed by leaps and bounds in the past decades, we must acknowledge that there are times when those measures are ineffective or insufficient to relieve suffering. Medical aid in dying is an instrument whereby suffering, that of the terminally ill and that of those who know and love the patient, is alleviated. As interdependent beings, the availability of medical aid in dying to those with terminal conditions serves to relieve and release us all from pain. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages. We are never complete and never perfect. Our commitment to transformation states that with new knowledge and new understanding, we adapt and grow. To a certain extent, we are an evidence-based faith. And with 25 years of experience with medical aid in dying in places like Oregon and Washington, we have learned that medical aid in dying can be properly administered and regulated, that physicians can opt in or opt out as they choose, that there is no slippery slope toward euthanasia as opponents try to assert. All evidence points to the thoughtful, careful, and considered use of MAID by patients everywhere it is available. All evidence points to the fact that it is time to make it available in New Hampshire. Generosity and justice call us to work to move our legislature to adopt medical aid in dying. We might do this for ourselves, wishing to have this option available should we receive a terminal diagnosis. But it is out of a spirit of generosity that we are called to make this option available for others whom we may never know. I would assert also that the medical model that dominates our healthcare system, a model that expends boundless resources on curing and healing, often at the cost of our humanity, is a form of systemic oppression that we are called to dismantle. Placing the power of choice into the hands of those who are suffering is the just and generous thing to do. Now, it turns out that our association and many of our congregations have been on the vanguard of the Death with Dignity movement, as it has been called in the past. The first efforts to allow medical aid in dying in Oregon were organized by members gathered in the basement of the First Unitarian Church in Portland. 35 years ago, nearly a decade before Oregon passed legislation to legalize medical aid in dying, our 1988 General Assembly of Congregations adopted a general resolution entitled The Right to Die with Dignity. In that resolution, the gathered congregations endorsed, and I quote, the right to self-determination in dying and the release from civil or criminal penalties of those who, under proper safeguards, act to honor the right of terminally ill patients to select the time of their own deaths. 1988. And as far as I can tell, that resolution still stands as a valid call to action of our Association of Congregations, a call that we, UUs in New Hampshire, are compelled to answer. In September of 2020, Judy's port for her feeding tube failed. And rather than undergo yet another surgery, she decided that it was time to exercise her right to die under Oregon's Death with Dignity Act. Judy's 2 daughters were summoned to her bedside. And I'll let her husband, Dwayne, describe the last hours of Judy's life. On the morning of the last day of her life, Judy spent time writing letters to get out the vote in Pennsylvania. She also spent private time with each of her girls and me, and then declared that she was ready to die. It was a lovely sunny day with a breeze. When I opened the door to let the hospice nurse in, she heard the neighbor kids playing and asked to have the door left open and the windows to be open to admit the sounds and the breeze. She had chosen music for her last moments, Sure on This Shining Night by Morton Lauridsen. Anne and Katie and I were present at her death, along with Stephanie Kaza, whom she had invited to be, quote, the calm person. There were 2 volunteers with End-of-Life Choices of Oregon and the hospice nurse also present. Within less than 5 minutes after taking the drugs, she was unconscious, and within less than 20, her life had ended very calmly. Now, I don't want to romanticize Judy's death. She suffered and suffered greatly for months and years. Endless treatments that sapped the lifeblood from her, nausea, hair loss, all the things that go with filling your body with poison to try to slow the progress of a relentless disease. She hated being sick and the toll that it took, not just on her, but on all those around her. She desperately wanted to live long enough to see Trump defeated. And she wanted even more to live long enough to see her grandchildren grow up. But that was not to be. As I bring my reflections to a close, I want to return to our UU principles to remind us that all of those principles are grounded in love. They are grounded in love. Love lies at the heart of who we are. Love is the foundation upon which our faith is built. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Love of life, interdependent life, love of our neighbors, love of a just and equitable world are all at the heart of who we are as Unitarian Universalists. We are called in every instance to ask ourselves, what does love demand? What does love demand? And I would answer in this case that love demands that every person with a terminally condition be offered the freedom to choose when they have suffered long enough, when their pain has become unbearable, when they are simply done with living, and to quietly, calmly, peacefully bring their own life to an end. As Judy's life and death demonstrate, that choice, should one choose to make it, is, I think, the ultimate act of love. This day and every day, I wish you peace. Amen.